home and to any members of the press. Delighted to welcome Councillor Nye to Planning Committee. You're very welcome and your expertise will be much valued. And to Councillor Mosdell, who's returning as a permanent member of committee. A few housekeeping notices then. I shall introduce our principal officers. On my right, we have Mr. Ollie Bolter, who is the Strategic Manager for Planning and Infrastructure. To his right, we have Ms. Sarah Wilkinson, Planning and Development Manager, and to her right, Mr. Russell Chick, who is also the Planning and Development Manager. Mr. Neil Troughton sits adjacent. He's the Highways Representative for Island Roads. On my left, we have Ms. Jodie Gibson, who is our Legal Advisor, and Ms. Mary Bartlett, our Committee Clerk. So there are no planned fire drills during this meeting. If you hear the fire alarm sound, please treat it as the real emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route. The nearest escape route is via the signposted set of stairs to your left as you leave the council chamber or the public gallery. Exit via the door at the back of the building, walk across the inner car park around the building to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. Lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency. Please don't re-enter the building until you're advised it's safe to do so by a member of staff. If I could ask if everyone quickly checks their mobile phones are switched to off or to mute, and for our speakers to use the microphones when speaking, it's just the right silver button. Members will obviously be well aware that they cannot leave the council chamber during the presentation or the debate of an application. If you do leave, you won't be able to vote on that application. Obviously, those who are watching virtually or in the public gallery, just to remind you that you're here to observe and to try to keep any sounds to a minimum. I'll run through the lighting system. So when you're asked to speak, the green light will illuminate as it is currently. The amber light will flash for a few seconds when you have a limited time, 30 seconds or so to speak. And then when the red light illuminates, I'll stop you, or I will probably allow you to finish your sentence. That's to ensure that all parties receive a fair bite of the cherry. So apologies, we've had apologies from Councillor Lilly and none others. I don't know if there's anything else to note. So we go to the meeting minutes of our two previous meetings. Any comments, addendum or errata, Councillor Quirk?
On the first page of the minutes, on page 5, the declarations of interest, I didn't declare an interest in a minute. I've made a statement that explains the situation that myself and other members of the committee had been on the committee before on 2 occasions when we had come to a conclusion and made a decision on that particular application, and that it would be perverse for us to change our minds unless there was some significant evidence put forward, something that was new. And I explained that that did not make me predetermined, although it did make me predisposed, and I did provide specific wording to the extent of that to officers prior to making that at the meeting. Yes. I would suggest that we actually go back to the wording that I provided, because it was specific and it was to cover the potential of legal challenge because of the someone accused of being predetermined.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I'm not very happy with the minute as it stands.
I would suggest, therefore, we amend that. Do we have consensus on that point? In which case, I think we can just simply go to the vote unless there are any other points to make. So those approvals subject to Councillor Quirk's amendment, all in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Sign those. Thank you very much. So we go then to declarations of interest. Declarations. Councillor Quirk. Okay, apologies. That is, I didn't realise there was a second set that you wanted to amend, in which case I will need to revisit that. But thank you, Councillor Quirk. Microphone, Councillor Quirk.
On page 11, on the resolution of the second set of minutes, I believe that we actually said that the application to come back within 12 months,
We did.
not in 12 months. We don't have to delay it if everyone's ready in advance. So we shouldn't put an insistence in our minutes that was not in the meeting.
That is, yes.
I think that should be within 12 months.
Yeah, indeed, eminently suitable. Those in favour of that amendment? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Splendid. We go then to declarations of interest. Any declarations? Great. Councillor Quirk.
I don't think it's an interest as such, but my grandson works for White Shipyards, who are immediately adjacent, and this application does have some effect on areas used by White Shipyards. So just for avoidance of any doubt, I will declare I have a non-pecuniary interest in that my grandson is a design engineer at White Shipyards.
Thank you for your transparency. That's noted. I don't think that gives rise to any issues. Any other declarations of interest? No, fantastic. Before then we move to the planning report. I have had an apology from Councillor Lilly and a request that we consider the West Acre report, which was due to be debated today at the next planning committee. I spent a lot of time considering that. I feel that on balance, in the interests of public openness and transparency, that it is reasonable so to do. So we will be removing that from the agenda. I'm usually I am loath to remove things when it's been ventilated, but I feel given the interests and sensitivities, I know Councillor Lilly was very much part of that West Acre application. So I think on balance, that is the right thing to do, particularly with the notion of what we've received in our report regarding democracy and access. So on that basis, I don't know, I think I just also wanted to say that clearly we have had a very interesting report that I think we properly ventilated at full council. So I just wanted to remind everyone of the importance of that. I feel that planning committee is constantly professional and constantly vigilant against any of the issues that were highlighted, but I think it's important to underline that. One thing I would like to say is that I think we need to appreciate that when it comes to the reports that we are looking at, that they are the products of the planning department in total, as opposed to necessarily individual officers. So I'd like us to try to avoid catechizing or in other ways apostrophizing officers. It's obviously very fair to ask questions. I don't want to cross-examine to the level of individual points such as you say, or is it not the case you think, because it's ultimately about what planning in general says, that collective of expertise. Splendid. We move then to our planning report, which is agenda item 5. So this is reference 24, I beg your pardon, question time. In my earnestness, we have moved too quickly. Public question time. Are there any public questions from the gallery? Seems not. Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Palin.
Thank you. Just a quick one. Ahead of the item you're about to discuss, I just wanted to make councillors aware that there was a McKeedy's transport plan that was discussed for East Cowes in 2022. And I don't believe councillors have seen this as it's been kept confidential until now, but I do believe it has implications on the application you're about to discuss. I just wanted to make you aware and see if you had actually seen that or not.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. I appreciate that it's more of a statement than a question. I don't anticipate you require a response from me, so it is noted. Thank you very much. Thank you. Any additional questions? We have not received any, as far as I'm aware, submitted previously, so we move forwards. Agenda item 5, our planning report. This is reference 24/00807/OUT. This is Venture Keys and Trinity House Depot. This is a hybrid application, and defer now to Ms. Wilkinson to present the report. Ms. Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. Afternoon, members, and all. Hopefully, bear with me, we are presenting in a slightly different way this month due to issues with technology. So hopefully this is going to work. My voice is quite loud, so I'll move it away a little bit further from my laptop and see if that helps. Hopefully. Right, again, bear with me. Okay. As outlined in the report, the application relates to the land in and around the Red Funnel Ferry Terminal in East Cowes. We all know that well, and we were on site on Friday, but I have got a couple of images that just show that in terms of a Google aerial to show the site identified in the red line, which somewhat handily shows the existing marshalling yards in a slightly darker grey to the proposed marshalling yard, which is in a slightly lighter grey. But we will go into that in more detail. That just shows the landward elements of the scheme, whereas this plan shows the red line for the application boundary, which also incorporates some off-shore elements, as we previously discussed. But what I will just jump back to the previous slide and just identify for locational purposes, as I said, you're all very aware of the site, but still I will just identify for completeness the Columbine building to the north here. So that is the very site boundary at the greatest extent in that direction. And then at this point, the closest listed building to the site, which is the Clare Ludlow gridiron building, which we looked at when we were on site. I just wanted to make sure those were identifiable in relation to the application itself. Moving through the slides, you then have the application boundary outlined in red. The areas that are in a dappled or a hatched red are the outline elements, with all other elements being the full. This part just simply showing other land within the control and ownership of Red Funnel. This does not form part of the application site. In terms of this plan, you also have an area that's greyed out offshore, and you will see that the red line flows into that area. That is part of the site that's also covered by a marine licence. So that part will be subject to separate processes through the Marine Management Organisation, and then sits alongside the planning process. I thought this plan was really helpful for members to locate themselves in relation to the references within the report, because it clearly identifies what areas we're looking at in relation to the site. Firstly, we have the Columbine building, as we've discussed already, which is a good marker for the locational purposes. You then have what's referred to in the report as the redux yard, which is the proposed marshalling yard area. You then have the in blue outline, what is the Trinity yard, or part of the Trinity yard, I should say, and then in purple, the Phoenix yard. Again, for locational purposes, you then have to the front of Phoenix yard and the side of Trinity yard, you have the Clare Ludlow gridiron building. Just some general photos in and around the site. Councillors, we were there on Friday, so I won't stay on these for any length of time. You are aware of this location. And moving through the application, there is quite a lot incorporated within it, and so I'm hoping that the slides will help us go through these in turn. But I thought what was helpful was to stop on this for a moment. The slide on this side shows the existing situation. So you have the redux yard, which we were on there on Friday, had a lot of movement in terms of the more HGV commercial vehicles coming backwards and forwards currently, and the drop trailer area. And then you have the Trinity yard and the Phoenix yard. The Trinity yard currently being used primarily for the marshalling of vehicles, with the Phoenix yard almost a holding area before you cross the road. We saw that on Friday. And then the existing link span and berth with the existing terminal in this part of the site. Again, we looked at that on Friday. Proposal sees that moved around a little bit. In on section 3.2 of the report, it sets out a detailed list of what is incorporated within the full element of the application. I will just touch on some of those elements in relation to how they appear on the slide at the point of the cursor. As you will see, you have coloured elements within this plan saying mixed use development and hotel development. Those are the two elements of the application that are outline only. The rest of the development is full, and that is what I will run through now. You have the demolition of the existing terminal building, which again we source on site. It's approximately in this location, and that would be moved down to this position here. Apologies, my mouse is very sensitive. I will try and get on the right spot. That is in that area, which is shown, and then associated with that, you then have a car parking and drop-off area. They're shown as 19 and 20 on that plan, if you can see that more clearly. We then have an area of, as part of that part of the site, we also have some improvements at number 12, which is an area to be used for a public realm and waterfront access. We looked at the existing decking area and jetty when we were on site on Friday. That would be replaced and provides an area of public realm and seated area to provide direct waterfront access. There's also, as we discussed, the creation of the vehicle marshalling yard on Redux. As you'll see from your update paper in front of you, this section of the report refers to Redux and Trinity yards. That should just say Redux yards, so apologies for any confusion there. With the creation of vehicle accesses and egresses routes from the Dover Road 1 would remain, but be for an emergency situations only. You would then have a new access coming into the site off Castle Street, approximately at 17. You would then have an exit at number 2 at the top of this plan, right alongside the Columbine building. The proposal then incorporates an entrance exit for the front of the Columbine building at this point of the cursor here at number 6. The application also includes various ancillary buildings associated with the link span, which we will look at later. The construction of a new vehicle link span and berth, and ultimately the demolition and the recreation of the existing one. The replacement, as I said, the replacement of the link span. So the existing link span replacement in the report is referred to as the southern link span, with the new link span being the northern link span. There would also be upgrades to Trinity Wharf at the point here at number 11 on plan in front of you, which would be for an emergency docking for the Red Jet facilities as and when required. And then as well as that, you would have a pedestrian pontoon to access onto that from that decked area, as well as the removal of the existing slipway off Dover Road, which is approximately in this location, very approximately, and some highway works off-site, which we will also get to. That's a very, very quick run through of just the list of the main elements of the scheme. We will go through each of them in turn, but I just wanted to highlight those. As stated, the outline elements of the site are shown in blue and purple, the blue being a mixed-use development, commercial and residential, and the purple being a proposed hotel. I thought it was useful to just stop on this slide for a moment, which was in association with a question that was asked at the committee site visit, which details the proposed stages of the phasing. These are set out in the report at 3.23, so I won't go through them in any detail, but in essence, the scheme would be phased. We also have incorporated a condition at number 4 at the back of your reports for the full element conditions, which allows that to be agreed in detail. So it's only currently indicative, but in essence, what the phasing plan ensures is that ferry service can continue and there is some consistency of service and continuity of service while the works are being undertaken. Due to that, most of the works would be undertaken in the winter months to start with in terms of the berths, so it does not affect the timetable too significantly when the service isn't as busy. I will now move through as quickly as possible, so my apologies because this is quite a long presentation, some of the elements of the full aspects of the application. This plan is showing the support details, the support structure details for the link span as you come across, and then a visual of that. This shows the fixed link span approach for the northern link span, and then the same for the southern link span. What you will see here is this dashed line, through the centre here that runs diagonally across this part of the site. That is the position of the existing slipway, which is why that slipway would have to be removed as part of the scheme. You will see in your heads of terms that a contribution has been agreed in order to mitigate the loss of that splitway. And what you'll also see from this slide, which we'll get to in more detail, is a yellow element that crosses this southern slipway, and that is the elevated pedestrian walkway bridge, which we will get to in more detail as we move through these slides. I mentioned briefly when we were going through the list of elements of the site, the incorporation of various buildings for the functionality of the link span. Obviously, the link spans are articulated to allow for them to work at all states of tide, and therefore in the part of the site where you see those circles alongside the proposed 2 link spans, there would be a control room, a plant room, and to the northern one, a generator and substation. And that's just showing the visuals of those buildings. They would be very functional and fit for purpose in essence. They're very small scale. The application, as I've previously stated, would include a dock area for the red jet for the use of emergencies. You will see within condition 27 of the report for the full element, there is a condition that restricts the use of that to emergencies only. So it would not be a permanent relocation of the red jet. It would simply be for a case of emergency. I think we discussed on site the fact that I believe it was last year there was an issue with the bridge or the docking at West Cowes, and the red jet couldn't actually dock. So this ensures that there is some consistency of service in that event. You will see that as part of this, there would be a covered walkway, which would be similar to that is seen at West Cowes, travelling from that decking area. We talked about the replacement deck for an area of public amenity and seating. That's at the point of the dot now, and then the link span onto the proposed red jet jetty would in essence come from the back of the terminal building at this point here and access around that docked area. In terms of the proposed marshalling yard, this would be located on the existing redux yard, as we previously discussed. That's just the 2 images are identical ones, just blown up a bit more, so hopefully you're able to see it in slightly more detail. The proposed marshalling yard would allow for approximately 339 what we call car equivalent units. The existing Trinity marshalling yard only allows for 200, so there would be quite an increase in terms of the number of vehicles that could be accommodated within the marshalling yard itself. The current ferry has a capacity, or an average capacity, of 180 vehicles, so the marshalling yard is generally about the size of an existing ferry, whereas the proposed marshalling yard would allow a significantly greater amount of vehicles, which would allow for those who arrive early and wait to go on. As discussed on site in some detail, the application would include 5 check-in booths opposed to the existing 1, and 4 lanes of those check-in booths would be for cars, and 1 lane would be specifically for HGVs, that being at the end. Those check-in booths would lead to approximately 42 rows in order to allow access for vehicles. As discussed during the site visit, what you would also have as part of this is a stacking lane running off the ferry all the way around the edge of the site at the point of the cursor, and then running down the side before merging and exiting onto a new exit on Castle Street opposite Waitrose, directly opposite Waitrose in essence. The entrance would come in almost from a slipway at this point, where you would have 2 lanes, which would then and then access to those 5 booths. What you have as part of this exit route is that can accommodate half a ferry load of vehicles actually on the site itself, rather than the existing access, which comes, as members will be aware, out of Dover Road, and Dover Road is a relatively short section of road. So whereas currently the vehicles will then stack back onto the ferry, slowing disembarkation because Dover Road is very short, this layout will allow for half a ferry load of vehicles to disembark and still be held in the marshalling yard before it exits onto the highway. The access road, as I said, comes in at this point, as a slipway entrance into 2 lanes, which then go to your 5 booths, or your 5 lanes at this point. I think one of the key things, I will go through a plan in a moment that shows the movement of vehicles through the town centre, but one of the key things at this point for consideration is that generally people don't all arrive to get on the ferry at the same time. There's a window to arrive at the ferry terminal, but every vehicle that leaves the ferry terminal leaves at the same time. They all exit the boat at the same time. Therefore, this is why the layout has incorporated such a long stretch of the marshalling yard for exiting vehicles, so they can be held on site and not on the network, and not such a long stretch for incoming vehicles, because that's a more drip-fed approach into the site generally. And then they then do have the whole of the marshalling yard to then stack once they arrive. So hopefully that is clear. Then, as we've previously discussed, there would be an entrance and exit for the front of the Columbine building, and that apron to the front of the building at the point of the cursor, alongside the HGV entrance into the site. This is just a plan showing a highlighted element of the proposed entrance and exit from the marshalling yard. What the proposal incorporates, as members will see with the hatching in the kind of pinky purple colour, is that the crossing of the footpath would be raised and of a different material than the road, so it will be clear to vehicles that that is a pedestrian priority. I've got some images of that and how it's seen in Southampton and Eastleigh, actually, on the other side of the water. You then have that entrance and access into the Columbine building, which is here, and then the exit from the site itself. Again, as previously stated, they are directly opposite the entrance and exit into Waitrose. Both junctions, the Waitrose junction and the ferry junction, have been designed to incorporate ducting, so that if in the future lights are required, they could be incorporated, but they're not considered to be necessary at this point, and traffic would simply merge into Castle Street. As promised, I have some images of that crossing, the nature of crossing that is proposed for across the vehicle access into the site, as seen from Southampton, along near to the ferry terminal in Southampton, with the end image being actually in Eastleigh. And you'll see that is into the, if councillors know Southampton relatively well, I believe this is the entrance into West Quay Shopping Centre, or IKEA, one of those buildings along near the ferry terminal. And then you have that raised area for pedestrians. So there is a clear distinction for vehicles that there is a change in zone at that point. I thought this plan was useful just for information. You'll see that the officer report references the history of the site and the fact that it does have extant consent for some of the elements that are now being proposed, and has historically had permission for the majority of the elements now being proposed. I thought this plan was useful just to show this is the marshalling yard that formed part of the approved consent for the 2015 application, which was the application that went to appeal and was allowed by the inspectorate. And this shows the marshalling yard as it could be built tomorrow, in essence, which shows a similar access arrangement off Castle Street, although it's not quite such a slipway, it's more of a direct junction. A very similar exit opposite Waitrose, and then the lane configuration. What this did was have the lane configuration was in essence turned 90 degrees, so it was running in a different direction rather than having shorter lanes. It had a lot of longer lanes. This also had the drop-off area within this element of the site. It didn't have a separate drop-off area for pedestrians, and the terminal building would have been in this location as part of that scheme. So it is a different scheme, but I think the configuration of the access and entrance is important when considering this application, because this does have extant consent. This could be built tomorrow. What this didn't include as part of this scheme, due to the position of the drop-off area, was that long access fetch that we talked about, which would accommodate half a boatload of cars on site. That wasn't incorporated as part of that development. But I thought it was important. We have referenced it in the report, and that the history is relevant. So I wanted to show members what that historical consent looked like in terms of layout. Moving through, I said that I had a plan that just shows vehicle movements in and around the town, and I think this is quite an important plan to understand the way in which vehicles would move through the town. This is discussed in the committee report. ultimately what you have at the moment is obviously vehicles travel through the town along the same route as you get to the floating bridge, and then they enter the site that way through what is shown here as the hotel building. But in essence, the purple line that you see running through here and travelling that then combines with the floating bridge traffic to run through that part of East Cowes. What the application would do is take all traffic away from the town centre in essence, and that would come in at this point, travelling past Waitrose and then going up Castle Road. So it would keep, and as the purple lines show, which is the movement of traffic, the vehicle movements would be held on site far more than they are currently. As a result, much of the vehicle movements would happen in this part of the town rather than in this part of the town. Ultimately, the application doesn't alter the ferry process. There will still be ferries coming in and going out. They will be the same size ferries coming in and going out. We cannot avoid the fact that it will bring vehicles in kind of bursts into and out of East Cowes. That is the nature of a ferry terminal. The application can't alter that. It's part of the processes of a ferry terminal. What it can do is look at where those vehicles are pushed and how they manoeuvre within the site confines itself. So it won't change the number of vehicles coming in and out of the site, but the proposal seeks to take them out of the town centre and concentrate them as much as practically possible on site. Moving to the next plan. I completely appreciate that this is very difficult to read because of its size, so I'm not going to go through each and every element of it, and I'm not expecting members to be able to see it on the plan, but what I wanted to do was highlight really that the number of annotations on this plan shows that there are a number of proposals to the for the wider network that are proposed as part of this application, which are referenced within the committee report. Some of them simply include changing of signs. So a number of these where you see them at the extremity, kind of outside the areas of the site, kind of further afield up here, are in relation to the changing of signage or the changing of road markings and configurations, simply to make it flow better. Other elements that we discussed on site include alterations to Dover Road roundabout itself, and so removing that build out that you see on Dover Road roundabout, that raised area, and making that a compliant mini roundabout rather than the current one, which isn't. That would facilitate more ease of movement for larger vehicles in and around that roundabout. We also have a number of alterations to existing or curb lines and existing junctions with some small areas of road widening to facilitate a better route and links for pedestrians, as well as in this part of the site, a raised crossing point so that there's direct crossing from the proposed new bus stops, which are at the point of the cursor on Link Road, straight across the road at the raised crossing point here to the proposed new drop-off area and terminal building, thus stopping pedestrians having to cross the link span as they currently do, which we discussed on site. So there are a number of alterations that are proposed to the network. These resulted from a road safety audit and a healthy streets survey, which identified elements that are needed. Some of those are as small as resurfacing of footways that are currently in a poor state of repair, and some involve widening of Castle Road at points along its route in order to improve that provision. Moving on to the proposed terminal building and drop-off area. Apologies, bear with me. The proposed terminal building would be positioned on what I'm calling, for the purpose of the presentation, Trinity Yard North, opposed to Trinity Yard South, which forms part of the outline application. So Trinity Yard would be split into two. The new terminal building would be positioned at the point of the cursor, which, as previously stated, is on the opposite side of the current link span to the current terminal building, which would mean that anyone arriving at the terminal building by foot wouldn't have to cross the link span to access the terminal building, which you currently do, as well as providing an area for drop-off and parking. There would be 31 car parking spaces proposed within this area. It also includes a small area of green space where there currently is none, that is being called a dog park. In essence, it would provide an area for small area of recreation while you're waiting for the vehicle, for the ferry. At this part of the site, you can just make out some dotted lines. These are what's referred to in the report as the pop-up stalls, which would allow for various kiosks to come at busy periods like the festival, where there may need to be greater provision for refreshments and whatnot. Yet the replacement terminal building itself would be in this location. That would include an extended cafe at ground floor level. So you'll see from the elevations, which we'll get to shortly, that the ground floor level has a larger footprint than the upper stories. It is a proposed 3-story building. That lower story would provide a cafe and external seating in a single-story projecting element, with then other facilities within the ground floor element. You can then see in the slide, in the image below, that the actual building, the rest of the building itself, is a narrower structure for the first and second floor of that building. And what I have incorporated, apologies, is probably in the most easiest place, but what I wanted to show as we were discussing the proposed drop-off area, which would incorporate 31 spaces. As we looked at on site, this is the existing drop-off area. So it is 4 spaces. It is used for taxis, as well as drop-off, as well as deliveries to the terminal building. So this would be replaced with a much larger and more effective drop-off area, as shown on the slide, with access off Castle Street South, with 31 car parking spaces. We then move through to the remaining floor plans and then the proposed elevations for the terminal building. One of these is in colour, the rest are in black and white, but hopefully, councillors, the materials are set out within the committee report, and you will get an idea of the nature of the visual appearance of that building from other slides we have. What you see as this red, what appears to red-edged, what appears to be hovering element at the side of the building, that is the raised pedestrian walkway that we've discussed. That would come out of the second story of the building in order to provide direct access onto the passenger deck of the ferry itself. So as I move through the elevations, you can see the single-story cafe element of the building that's previously been discussed. That would have an overhang around it to allow for some external seating. That would also have a living roof, which would add to the biodiversity on the site. We've discussed the pedestrian walkway slightly. This would be an elevated walkway which would run at the point of the cursor over the southern link span. This part of it would be glazed, as can be seen in this image here. The remainder of the link span that would then run down the side between the the remainder of the walkway, which would run between the 2 link spans, would then run along the point of the cursor in that yellow there, which, as I said, would provide direct access onto the pedestrian deck of the ferry. That would be, as shown here, is more of a grey metallic finish that can be seen, councillor is aware of the pedestrian access currently to the red jet. It's a similar structure. And again, that shows it just travelling down between the 2 link spans to access onto that upper level of the car ferry itself. I've incorporated some images to help visualise that part of the site. In terms of the existing, is at the base of this image, showing the existing buildings and then the existing terminal building, and then how that would appear in relation to the replacement terminal building, and then that walkway that runs along the line of that dotted line there. And some further visuals, seeing a street scene of that, where you can see that terminal building in the background there, with that walkway going across. Probably it would help if I said, for locational purposes, that's the Claire Ludlow building there that we previously discussed. So just to refocus you locationally. Again, some more visuals to show that proposed walkway and the proposed terminal building, how it would appear in a 3-dimensional context. These are some wireframes that have been provided. The bottom image shows that from further afield, from in essence the edge of the conservation area, as you're looking down, and then obviously the blue shows how that bridge walkway would appear when looking down the hill, and then from Dover Road how the building and that bridge would appear. Moving on to the outline element of the site, is shown in the side image here, being the blue and the purple. The blue element of the site, as previously indicated, as previously discussed, is the Trinity Yard South element, and that would be a mixed-use development incorporating 520 square metres of commercial space, which would be at the ground floor, and then up to 520, because it is only outline, and then on the floors above it would be up to 30 residential units as part of that redevelopment. On the Phoenix Yard site, which is the purple, that proposes an up to 80. Although this is outline, an entire outline with no matters to be considered, some indicative plans, illustrative plans have been provided that show the floor layout and how that would sit within those two sites. You can see from the hotel development, much the ground floor would be provided as car parking, which would be under the building. And then elements of car parking under the building in the commercial element of the development as well. And then moving through those, you would then have, in terms of the Trinity Yard South, the floors, how they would break up through. The report references that there would be this reduced height element in the middle, which could be utilised. It's indicated as part of these plans as a roof terrace for the resultant residential properties, but that would be subject to detailed design, so we would ensure that it wouldn't impact on the residential properties that sit within this area of the site. As we then move through to the hotel building, again, that shows to be up to 80 bedrooms, with again a split in the middle to have some variation in height. I've incorporated these two plans because I thought they were relatively helpful just to get a visual aspect of the elements of the site. What you see there are elements that are shown as the existing heights of buildings on this side, and then the proposed heights of buildings on this side. In essence, what the key heights are probably to look out for is the blue on the plan are 3 to 4 story buildings, whereas the green are 4 to 5 story buildings on this part of it. The application site for the outline shows, in terms of its parameters, a maximum height of up to 15 metres, which is the dark blue, and then up to 12 metres, which is more the turquoise in the central area. That's equivalent to a 4-story building and a 3-story building approximately. And then you've got a purple area, which would be the surface car parking. I've incorporated these images, which show some street scenes of those potential replacement buildings within those areas. The reason why this is potentially helpful for councillors is you'll see a dotted line on both the top image and the bottom image. That bottom line shows the height of the previously approved parameters for the previous application that was considered to be acceptable. So where we discussed previously the full element and the marshalling yard, that also included, that was again a hybrid and included an outline element. The buildings that were considered to be acceptable at that time are shown within the dashed lines in these images. Just a couple more, I promise, and then we'll bring it to a close. What I've incorporated here are 2 more wireframe images. This is a before and an after shot that shows the changes that would result looking from the ferry across at the site approaching East Cowes. You can see that the proposed full elements are in the blue with the outline in the red, and how they sit in relation to the Columbine building, which again is a large scale building in that location. The final image looks at is a similar approach to wireframes, but that shows it from the entrance to the floating bridge on the opposite side of the river. So looking across from West Cowes, where you have the existing, and then again for locational purposes, we've got the Claire Ludlow building there. Again, you can see that in the bottom image, with the red being the proposed outline and the parameters of that outline, and then the blue being the proposed terminal building and link span. Although pure outline, they are seeking the parameters as set out within the plans, as shown within the slides in front of you, councillors. And then we'll end on the master plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms Wilkinson. We turn then to our public speaking element of this application. So if I could ask Ms Martha James on behalf of East Cowes Town Council. Ms James, you have 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. The Town Council object to the application for the following reasons: the lack of parking for the hotel, the highway impact, the loss of the public slipway and flood risk. As you can clearly read in the officer report, Red Funnel have submitted applications in the past which the council have granted or they've been granted an appeal. And only part of the schemes for many of these applications has been implemented. This has left a mismatch of partial schemes, which has resulted in a waterfront that looks constantly under construction instead of one of the gateways to and from the Isle of Wight. How can we be sure that this time Red Funnel will see things through and implement the scheme? They might do as they've done previously and cherry-picked elements they like and simply never implement the more challenging aspects. The residents of East Cowes are greatly affected by Red Funnel in the peak season when it becomes impossible to enter or leave the town due to loading and unloading of ferries. They welcome an application that would result in an overall improvement, but they are not convinced this is what they have. The town council have tried really hard to engage with Red Funnel, but at times the residents have felt the consultations that have been held are leading or that Red Funnel simply ignores them, concentrating on their business interests rather than remembering they're part of a wider community and that everyone should be working together. The Town Council and Red Funnel are both members of an Isle of Wight Council initiative called the East Cowes Waterfront Regeneration. And before this application was submitted, the councillors asked to see the plans before they went live, and Red Funnel declined to show them. This leads the Town Council to believe that Red Funnel don't really want their views. They appear to simply want to do a tick box exercise to say they've consulted the community. And it's a real shame, as the Town Council are open to having a dialogue with Red Funnel and want to see things improved for the town. Anyone who's visited East Cowes will know that there is already insufficient parking in the town. The Isle of Wight Council and Red Funnel even commissioned a joint report written by highways consultant Marquides, which confirmed that there wasn't currently enough parking in the town. The Town Council raises significant concerns that the under-provision of parking for the hotel would place pressure in the core area of the town, especially in the peak of summer. Whilst we recognise the hotel would be in the town centre due to the high level of parking provision normally required for hotels, of 1 parking space per room, the Town Council asks why the applicant has not really submitted a parking assessment to demonstrate that there's sufficient parking nearby. And without that information, the Town Council is of the view that the parking provision is deficient. The Town Council is very concerned that the proposed changes to the highway network will result in a non-compliant network on the western side of Castle Street, as buses which will encroach onto the proposed junction. It might be a slight improvement on the current situation, but really the council should be looking for more than that. This is an application for high-level traffic use, and the council should be looking for full compliance. The application includes a document written by Ramble about the slipway, and the Town Council believes that some elements of this report cause them concern. At the start of the report, it says proposals for a replacement slipway to allow the launch and recovery of small craft are being explored. It also says the report is a high-level overview. When it says being explored and high level, it simply means early stages, which is markedly different from the previous application, which included plans and location for replacement. Within this scheme, there is no provision at all for a replacement slipway. The applicant is offering a fixed sum of money, and the Ramble report suggests that the Albany Road slipway could be upgraded. There are no costings with the report for the replacement slipway, as it is high level. And as a consequence, it is really impossible to make any clear assessment, and the Town Council understandably fear that whilst the current slipway is far from perfect, that the community will lose the slipway altogether, as the money that Red Funnel will provide simply won't be enough for replacement. And the Town Council, via the residents' council tax through the precept, will be required to stump up the shortfall. As there are no costings, no one can properly assess whether the money being offered is reasonable. This seems to the Town Council completely unacceptable. If Red Funnel business operations require the loss of a slipway, which is a community facility, they should be required to pay a full replacement. This open-ended approach is really not right and leaves the community, through no fault of their own, in quite a difficult situation. We asked for a condition requiring that Red Funnel deliver a replacement slipway before removing the existing one. East Cowes Town Council note the suggested condition and comments about flood risk, and whilst they object to the application, they welcome the conditions.
Thank you very much, Ms James. We turn then to Ms Fran Collins on behalf of Red Funnel. Ms Collins, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. For over 164 years, Red Funnel's purpose has been to provide a lifeline service on which the Isle of Wight can rely. This proposal is about future-proofing the gateway to the island, and it supports the requirements of the East Cowes community at its heart. Our proposal will improve the waterfront for those who live here, help to attract visitors and businesses to the island, and it will improve the resilience and reliability of our services. Our vision is simple. We want to create a port that's safe, efficient and welcoming, and one which supports regeneration and sustainable economic growth. This investment into East Cowes is a significant step to a more reliable and cleaner future. We have an ambitious vision which has been supported by our new owners. Njord Partners believe strongly in the island's future, and their endorsement of this scheme is just the first demonstration of their commitment to Red Funnel and to the Isle of Wight. This scheme is part of our investment plan, and no additions to ticket prices are needed to fund it. It's an essential step for us to bring in a new, more sustainable and more reliable fleet, which in turn supports a healthy island economy. The plans have been shaped around local feedback. We held 2 phases of public consultation in which nearly 8,000 people engaged with us. In recognising the improvements to resilience, accessibility and congestion, 71% of those 8,000 consultees support our plans in principle. I cannot emphasise enough that this proposal supports the island's future, delivers the infrastructure that we badly need today, and it creates the foundation for sustainable growth, and it supports residents, businesses and visitors alike. I genuinely believe that this is a transformative opportunity for East Cowes and the wider island. We are committed to working in partnership with you and our stakeholders to make it a reality. Thank you for your time, and I hand over to Gavin, who is the local planning director at Savills.
Thank you, Ms Collins. In which case we certainly can go to Mr Hall from Savills. We'll then return to Mr Chapman if you're all happy with that. Mr Hall, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Picking up on the point of working in partnership, the application is in front of you today after 2 years of close partnership working with your officers, statutory consultees, and as Fran mentioned, the public. We have made changes through that process to reflect feedback and to resolve all technical concerns. The changes introduced by this application from the extant consent, as you have heard, provide a betterment through greater resilience for the vehicle ferry service to East Cowes in order to meet the future needs of the island. National planning policy dictates that significant weight should be given to the reuse of brownfield land and making more efficient use of land, whilst local planning policy that has been through examination allocates the site for the uses outlined in this application. The application provides significant positive economic and substantial positive social benefits by enabling unused land to be brought back into economic use, the improvement to the ferry service's resilience, and hence the impact to leisure, tourism, and those who rely on the ferries for their work and their health. It also, alongside the removal of ferry traffic from the town centre, as we've heard, and the payment that is in line with the cost of the improvements to the Albany Road slipway, as set out in the report to the Isle of Wight Council, will be provided. In the planning balance, concerns over ecological and neighbourly impact have been taken in the context to the existing uses and ferry operations that already exist, along with the mitigation that has been agreed. This has resulted in no objections from Island Roads, Natural England, the Environment Agency, or any other technical consultees. As your officer has clearly set out in a very robust and comprehensive report recommending approval, summarising that the principle of development is acceptable, the application delivers on national and local planning policy, the proposals provide significant and substantial benefits, all necessary mitigation has been secured, and there are no technical objections. The project's implementation will enable a robust and resilient connection to the mainland, which facilitates the economic regeneration of East Cowes at the same time.
Thank you very much, Mr Hall. We turn now to Mr Neil Chapman, also on behalf of Red Funnel. Mr Chapman, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I spend a great deal of my time on our island, and as someone who spent years working on cross-Solent travel, I know how vital reliable connectivity to the mainland for the Isle of Wight is. This proposal isn't just about upgrading a port. It's about securing Island's lifeline. We've listened to the concerns of the residents, the businesses and key stakeholders, particularly around congestion and reliability. East Cow can feel gridlocked at times. I know that firsthand from travelling through the town often myself. And delays frustrate everyone. Our plans tackle this head on: a larger marshalling yard to keep the traffic off the public highway, improve traffic management to ease traffic pressure on the town centre and make journeys smoother. The second link span will ensure resilience. Importantly, the proposal aligns with East Cow's wider regeneration master plan, ensuring the port complements the town's future vision. The scheme will create a safer, more efficient port, unlock opportunities for East Cows. The current yard isn't fit for purpose, and by relocating the terminal to fit better with the town centre and the waterfront, we can create space for a mixed-use development that complements East Cows rather than overwhelms it. This will make East Cows a destination, not just a departure point, meaning more visitors staying locally, spending money in our local businesses and helping the town thrive. Our focus is on improving operations and reliability for our car ferries and freight with no change to our high-speed service. Freight will continue as it does today without increasing at HGVs. Instead, there'll be a smarter operations to keep goods moving when the island needs them most. For the community, we recognise that reliability of service is vital, and we invest heavily in our preventative maintenance over the past several months, resulting in consistently 99% reliability. This project will build on that success. This is a once in a generation chance to improve our resilience, reduce congestion and help East Cows thrive. I respectfully ask for your support to make it happen. Thank you.
Timely. Thank you very much, Mr. Chapman. We turn then to the local councillor, and we're having Councillor Stephen Hendry speaking on behalf of Councillor Love. Councillor Hendry.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of Councillor Love and myself, thank you for allowing me to represent him. In Councillor Love's words, as Ward Councillor for North Weald, I remain strongly concerned about the red funnel proposals and their impacts on East Cows, community, economy and local infrastructure. These concerns have only increased in light of red funnel's declining financial position, reduced passenger footfall and the lack of transparency in the consultation process, including design drawings that did not fully reflect operation or safety impacts. Despite years of engagement, key safety concerns repeatedly raised by the community, town council and island roads have not been addressed. The highway risk remains substantial and conflicts directly with policy DM17, sustainable travel, which require development to reduce conflict between vehicles and pedestrians and ensure safe routes for vulnerable road users. At the Well Road roundabout, restricted turning space and reduced sight lines create a serious hazard. Along Castle Street, narrow pavements and restricted road width mean large vehicles will continue to mount pavements or enter into opposing traffic flows, creating unacceptable danger. Proposed mitigations for old roads and surrounding areas are inadequate and do not meet DM17 requirement for safe, accessible travel. Parking provisions are completely absent, despite documented undercapacity in East Cows, resulting in likely overspill into the high street and residential streets, contrary to DM17 expectations for adequate parking and avoidance of harmful impacts of local amenity. Should the application be approved, I would expect a substantial Section 106 contribution exceeding £1 million for essential highway safety improvement, speed reduction measures and traffic calming, along with specific funding for the replacement of the Dover Road slipway, estimated at £400,000, will be a loss as a direct result of this scheme. Flood risk and additional noise arising from the relocation of the Red Jet service remain unresolved, conflicting with DM14 flood risk and DM4 environmental and amenity, which require developments to avoid increasing flood hazards and present harmful environmental and noise impacts. These matters have been consistently highlighted, yet remain unaddressed. This proposal also gives rise to serious concerns regarding the long-term stability and viability of ferry services. Red Funnel had not demonstrated the financial resources necessary to deliver this scheme, particularly in the context of vessel replacement, requirements, and concerns evident in their own financial reporting. This raises questions about whether the development is deliverable or sustainable. The scale and nature of the proposed reject facilities at East Cowes strongly suggest a long-term intention to consolidate operations away from West Cowes, raising concerns about monopolistic control of the island gateway infrastructure. This strategic shift has significant implications for resilience and community access. Further, the proposal reduces essential deep water frontage and constrains existing and expanding shipbuilding operations, directly conflicting with DM11, existing employment sites, and SP3, economic development, which protects strategic marine employment, land, and high valuable industries. Shipbuilding on the island already operates within tight margins, and any reduction in operational footprint or access directly undermines competitiveness for local employment and opportunities. Finally, this scheme does not accord with SP7 travel, which requires developments to enhance transport accessibility, safe and sustainable movement. Instead, this proposal increases congestion, introduces new safety hazards, and fails to provide any sustainable transport enhancements. Despite years of constructors' input, only minimal elements of the communities and town council recommendations has been incorporated. This application is not simply a redesign of a marshalling yard. It represents a strategic restructuring of one of the island's key gateway facilities. Approving it without clear, demonstrable funding, robust mitigation measures, and protection for existing industries will be a detriment to East Cowes and the island's wider economic and transport interests. For these reasons, and in accordance with the planning policy referenced above, I, Councillor Carl Love, continue to object to this application on behalf of the community. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hendry, on behalf of Councillor Love. That concludes our public speaking element of this application. So we turn now to our discussion. As ever, I'm always quite keen to try to keep the question element section from the debate just as it aids those watching at home. So any questions that colleagues would like to commence with? Councillor Quirk.
In the statement from Councillor Love that was just read out, he suggests that there were issues that are from Island Roads that were not addressed. From my reading of the report, that isn't the case. Can we have some clarification there, please?
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Ms Wilkinson, can you speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Quirk. I can confirm that Island Roads have removed all objections to the scheme and have recommended conditional permission. Those conditions are represented within the report.
So with the recommendations that are made, Island Roads are satisfied that that is now okay?
Through the Chairman, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Further questions? Councillor Critchison.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to know a bit more about the transport strategy for East Cowes that was mentioned a couple of times by people, and that why we haven't had sight of that, considering there was Isle of Wight Council money towards it, and it did set out walking and cycling recommendations and other road safety issues with the roundabout conflicts, etc. So I think it would be quite important that we would have sight of that before we could make a judgment on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Critchison. Ms Wilkinson, can you speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Ultimately, the document discussed, I believe, was something that was commissioned by the council when there was a regeneration department and they were looking at the wider regeneration processes for East Cowes itself. It doesn't form planning policy. It hasn't been submitted as part of the planning application. Planning application has been considered in conjunction with the policies and the LC whip, and that's what the report is focused on. Island Roads have considered it. We've looked at it in relation to highway guidance in terms of what is required to make something acceptable in highway safety terms. There has been a road safety audit undertaken as part of, or stage 1 safety audit undertaken as part of the application documentation. A stage 2 audit will be done as part of the 278, thank you, too many numbers, 27838 process, which will then ratify the stage 1 that the recommendations have been made. So it's not planning policy. The application has been considered in light of planning policy, and that's where your recommendation sits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Supplementary, Councillor Critchison.
that I don't think it's taken into account the amount of pedestrian usage along the esplanades and those areas, and the turning left of cars going out and then going up Old Road, and couldn't quite make out from your plans what safety and traffic elements would be put into Old Road with traffic turning left, because it didn't look like there was a no turn left out of the proposed exit. And then what is there to stop all of that traffic going up through a residential area, or people racing to turn left to beat the cars going right? As we know, this could turn into an element. I wasn't sure what was put in place. It didn't seem very clear to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchison. Ms Wilkinson.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm going to attempt to share again, so please bear with me. This is much easier when you can just press a button. So hopefully we will get the computers fixed, so bear with me. Oh no, that's right. And then I've put this plan back up on the screen, which hopefully helps show how the configuration of this access has been designed. So in essence, there is a sweep to the exit, which would make, certainly it was designed so larger vehicles physically cannot turn left. Thank you. Wish I knew my left from my right. Apologies. Meaning larger vehicles physically cannot turn left. Smaller vehicles such as a car could, in theory, still turn left, and left could still travel up Old Road, should we say. However, they can now. Nothing stops a vehicle coming out of Dover Road, travelling up Castle Road and up Old Road, to stop having to follow the flow of the rest of the ferry traffic. Again, this isn't changing the nature of ferry traffic. It is simply changing where it enters and exits the site from. So it has been physically designed with this curve and the proximity to the Columbine building that you can't physically turn a large vehicle to go up Old Road. So a car can, but it can currently. So there is no proposed alterations or works within Old Road, because the application isn't considered to increase the likelihood of vehicles undertaking that route.
Thank you. Councillor Mosdell. Oh, beg your pardon, can't you have a supplementary?
I think it will. And I think we look at a future, we talk about future proofing ferry services, but what's to future proof those residential areas there? I think straight away we're causing a conflict in an area where there wasn't the amount of traffic. I think that's quite a dangerous point that I think we need to.
Certainly a matter for the debate, but yeah, note the point. Councillor Mosdell.
Thank you. And I listened really carefully last time on what's debate and what's a question. So I'm going to stick to my questions. You can tell me off if I don't. And the rest of the scribbles are for debate. So just wait for the next bit. I've got two questions. Firstly is I couldn't see it anywhere, and I listened to the comments on the slipway. Could you let us know, do we know how often that slipway is used? That's my first question. I do have another one.
Ms Wilkinson, are you able to speak to that, even if it's an approximation? That'd be helpful.
I don't have specific numbers, I've got to be honest. It is currently very little, I think is the answer. It is currently managed by Red Funnel, and therefore you have to get their permission to access it, because in order to access it, you have to cross the link span in order to take a vehicle. I would, however, highlight the relevant section of the report, 7.14 to 7.194 to 7.196, which incorporates, apologies about my voice, minutes from the East Cowes Town Council meeting and the Cowes Harbour Authority Committee, which reference that existing slipway as not providing a safe access for recreation. It is not fit for purpose, it is unsafe, and it is slippery and dangerous.
That was going to be my supplementary on that question, but you've answered it, so that's fine. So minimal and yeah, not particularly safe at the best of times. Okay. My next question is the hotel which has got the outline planning permission. There's been lots of mention about cars and parking and not enough parking and then using the town. My assumption when I read, and my planning knowledge is clearly nowhere like yours, is I would assume having a hotel in East Cowes where you have ferry travel, actually a lot of those people who would be residing there would be people who were walking over or building cycles and stuff like that. Is it a planning criteria how many parking spaces you have for a hotel? That's the bit that I didn't know, and that's the question, please.
Thank you, Councillor Mosdell. Ms Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a difficult one in that we do have a policy, or we do have a supplementary planning document that deals with car parking. In terms of hotels are a difficult one because of the nature of hotels. So, and the nature of I'm probably slightly stepping the line by saying this type of hotel, in that I think that it's relatively clear from the indicative. We can't control the operator, but it is relatively clear from the layout and the structure that it has been designed to meet a particular or a potential two end users. We are not talking about necessarily a tourism hotel, but kind of an overnight facility, which don't generally have significant amount of car parking. And there would be some car parking to the sorry, I'm desperately trying to get up the guidance while I'm talking. There would be some car parking in the Undercroft area, but yes, not full amount. As alluded to in the public speaking, we do have a SPD that deals with car parking that does say in town centres there would be 0 car parking. In non-town centres, you would expect car parking. That car parking for hotels, motels, guest houses and boarding houses are 1 space per visitor bedroom. However, there is a slight, shall I say, idiosyncrasy, for want of a better term, in terms of the designation of the town centre for East Cowes. And I am going to just share this plan with you, which I think is probably helpful in the understanding of this in terms of applying this policy and the reasonable application of that policy in terms of car parking. So apologies, I am sharing my live screen. So if any messages pop up, I apologise. In essence, what you see as the black dotted lines, both this part of the site, the East Cowes, sorry, the town, and then this small section there, they are the town centre boundaries. So for some reason, and I can't speak to that, rather than doing in the case of other town centres where you would have 1 town centre boundary, this has been split. The site sits between those 2 town centre boundaries. So I would suggest for practical application of policy, although it is not directly specific, it would seem unreasonable to suggest that the site is kind of in this area approximately, it sits directly between the 2. So to suggest that if the site was there, no parking would be required. If the site was slightly further northwest, northeast, and it was there, no parking would be required. But for some reason, the element in between has a fundamental impact on car parking. It's an unusual one. That town centre boundary does, I'm guessing by the look of that screen, alter as part of the IPS. So the proposed plan, although it's not a material consideration that I'm suggesting we take into account, that town centre boundary does change and the site would be part of that town centre boundary in the island planning strategy. And it is 1 larger area, and it accounts for the fact that there isn't this slightly strange split. So councillors would have to put their mind to whether it is reasonable to suggest in the small area between those 2 black lines, it is unacceptable to have a limited parking scheme. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, that's helpful. Does that answer your question, Councillor Moore? So I know you have others, so I will return to you. We have Councillor Quirk followed by Councillor Spink. Councillor Quirk.
Going back to Councillor Love's report, he suggested that there was a need for £1 million of the 106 agreement for traffic calming, etc. According to the plan, we've sorted the transport around the site. We've sorted roundabout at the current entrance to the site. There's a little bit of paint required, but other than that, the ferries will be the same size. vehicle numbers will probably be, I mean, I know the fund would like them to be higher, but they'll be what they are. And maybe they'll go back to what they were in the past. But it's no additional cars or lorries are likely to be a result. And for a 106 agreement, it has to be mitigating something that you've gone wrong. Am I not right? So if that's the case, that's a total red herring.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Ms Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Quirk. I think the answer to the question is yes, but it was in terms of the way it was structured, I apologise. In essence, you are correct in that a 106 can only mitigate harm as a result of the development. Yet the development does not increase ferry numbers. It does not increase the size of the ferries. It purely moves where the vehicles wait. But in doing so, and exit and enter, but in doing so, it provides a significantly greater area for those vehicles on site and takes them off the existing network. As a result, officers on Island roads have determined that, or officers on balance have determined the application actually has significant improvements to the highway network by taking the traffic off site, holding it on site and moving it from the town centre. And as a result, there is nothing to mitigate through a contribution of the scale suggested within those comments in relation to the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Supplementary, Councillor Quirk. Councillor Spink.
Thank you. I've got 3 or possibly 4 questions, but I won't necessarily expect to be allowed to ask them all right now. I might pause and let Councillor Monsdale ask her a couple more, and then perhaps I can have another go. But anyway, just dealing with the Section 106 agreement, really following on from Councillor Quirk's question. I mean, the road will be busier, won't it, as a result, perhaps not of the ferry terminal, but it will be busier as a result of the hotel and also the, I think it is 30 houses that are proposed. So that's going to lead, isn't it, to an increased traffic in the roadway surrounding the ferry terminal.
Thank you. Ms Wilkinson, were there any indicative figures, or maybe Mr Troughton would be able to assist in terms of what we could expect? I have to confess that I don't remember seeing anything in the report directly in relation to that. If there's even an approximation, would be helpful.
Thank you, Chairman. So Mr Troughton may wish to come in. It is covered to some extent within the highway section of the officer report. Yes, you are correct. There would be a degree of traffic coming associated with the proposed outline elements of the scheme. In terms of the traffic assessment that has been undertaken, that level of traffic generation has been looked at and is not considered to be significant. And therefore it is not kind of resulting in any significant impacts that would need to be mitigated as a result of the proposed development.
Thank you, Mr Troughton. You don't have anything you wish to add necessarily?
I think I just added it was a very robust assessment because through the TRIX database, they actually used out-of-town sites as well to establish the traffic generation from the uses. So it was overestimating the traffic generation of the outline. Still did not have a significant impact on the network. Rounds will be mitigated.
Thank you, Mr Troughton. Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. The outline planning permission, the application for outline planning permission, is that, I know it's in the report somewhere, but it's a very helpful report, and as a result, quite a long report. So it may be that I've missed it and I can't find it again now. But that's in, I think, flood zone 1, isn't it? Which is the major risk of flooding. What's the test? I think it's got to be that there's no other area within the regeneration area that the housing or the hotel could be built. There's no available land. I think is it the sequential test? Could you just help me with that, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. Could you speak to that, Ms Wilkinson?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chairman. This is covered in quite a lot of detail in the report. It's in flood zone 3, which is the highest level. So you're correct in that it's the highest level, but you've done the numbers the wrong way round. This is covered in quite a lot of detail in the report. It is in flood zone 3. The application ultimately has to demonstrate through a site-specific flood risk assessment that it will be safe. They have done that. It is demonstrated that it will be safe. All accommodation, that's why you've got commercial on the ground floor and you've got all accommodation above. So the risk comes from the nature and the vulnerability of the uses. The marshalling yard is a compatible use. That does not trigger the need for it. The elements in terms of the commercial and residential, they've undertaken a sequential approach to the site layout in terms of the greater vulnerabilities being higher. The buildings are also being elevated slightly in terms of their finished floor level, with the ground floors providing that slight buffer with the car parking and the commercial elements, which are more compatible at those areas. You also have a situation where the site is allocated within the IPS. As part of the process of allocating sites in the IPS, it is necessary to undertake a site-specific flood or a sequential test process for all those sites. I'm just going, before I say anything incorrect, I just want to find the section in the report that I'm referring to. So in essence, 7.165. So it starts from surface water and drainage and flood risk starts from 7.161.
Page 61 of your bundles.
And what you will see within that, and specifically in respect of paragraph 7.165 and 7.166, it does stipulate that how, in terms of the council's strategic flood risk assessment, the number of sites that were screened for flood risk, and the fact that the allocation of the site, in fact, represents the required step within the sequential test or undertaking a sequential test, and therefore the application moves straight to exemption test, and it's the exemption test that they've passed by demonstrating the site is safe.
Thank you. Supplementary on that particular question, Councillor Spink, and then I'll turn to Councillor Fuller.
If I may, I don't want to stray into cross-examining, as the chair said at the beginning, but my understanding, and I won't press it harder than this, my understanding is that you have to look at the sequential test first, and the sequential test has to be satisfied that there is no other area that could provide, in this case, a hotel or housing within the same area. And the same area would be the regeneration zone, and that you only then move on to the exceptions test if that is satisfied. And it's hard, if I may say so, to see how that's satisfied, because there must be that the regeneration area, an area in which a hotel and some housing could be built. So have I got that wrong about the sequential test?
Ms. Wilkins, can you speak to that and specifically regarding the regeneration zone and the availability therein? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there have been recent changes to the NPPF, which deals with the undertaking of sequential assessments, the undertaking of flood risk assessments, and the need for a site to demonstrate that it would be safe, which the application has done so. The application has been considered as recommended by the Environment Agency, who raised no objection. They also recommended that we consulted the fire service and our own emergency planning team. We have done both, neither of which who have raised any objection to the scheme. I'm not necessarily going to go into any greater detail than that which is in the relevant section of the report on flood risk in terms of answering this question, but simply outline that in undertaking an assessment of the application, consideration has been given to the process that was undertaken as part of the allocation of this site through the island planning strategy, which is recommended by the NPPF and which stipulates that the site is acceptable in sequential terms. This is a brownfield site in a town centre location, and therefore in undertaking the assessment and finding a reasonably suitable alternative for the provision of this site, the application is considered to be sequentially acceptable, and the sequential test has been passed through that process that is outlined within those sections we referred to in the report, and the application then moves to the exemption test, which is the consideration of it being safe.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson. I will defer to, I'll come back to you, Councillor Spink. I appreciate you've got a couple of other questions. Councillor Fuller.
Thank you. It's pretty basic question, really. I'm looking at the replacement of the public slipway. You know, the current slipway cannot be used because of red funnel. And what concerns me, and I want to ask the question, is why is there not a condition to replace the public slipway or improve the public slipway to Albany Road, rather than just a legal agreement and a contribution? This is a public asset that the general public uses, and there seems to be no planning gain from what is being suggested. And I would like to see some planning gain, and I'm wondering why the conditions are not strong enough to ensure that that planning gain becomes a reality.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. And if I may also add to that, as I was going to ask the question in relation to what is the legal status of that slipway? I appreciate that it's at the discretion of Red Funnel as to whether the public can use it. Has there been an easement established potentially, or any other proprietary rights? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Councillor Fuller. I will try and answer both questions the best I can. In essence, the slipway is owned by the council, firstly. It is Red Funnel manage it in terms of access because it crosses their site, and therefore you can access it. It is publicly available, but you just have to agree the times with Red Funnel so that you're not trying to reverse a boat down it at the point in which they are loading a ferry. As stipulated, it's currently not safe. So I suppose the question is whether what we're re-providing in terms of re-provision to some extent. However, there is no condition requiring the re-provision of the slipway at Albany Road because Albany Road's off-site, so it's not part of their remit. Albany Road is again owned by the council, so that it is within our gift to provide that re-provision. The contribution that has been sought of 170,000 is based upon works to make improvements to Albany Road slipway to make it more accessible at all points of tide. It could be that councillors decide they want to specifically state that contribution must be used only on Albany Road slipway. What officers have negotiated with Red Funnel is a little more flexibility within that wording, so that if an alternative slipway provision becomes a more preferred option, but to improve another slipway along East Cowes waterfront, that money could be spent towards that provision. Officers are aware of an aspiration by the sailing club slightly further up to provide improvements to an existing slipway that is kind of further up the Esplanade, almost opposite the cafe, that the dinghy park currently used to access the water. There is aspirations to enhance that. That is a significantly costly project that there is no funding for. So what officers have done is negotiated with Red Funnel in order to get a contribution to mitigate for the loss of the slipway based on a particular scheme and the costings of a particular scheme, but have incorporated adequate flexibility within that contribution that if an alternative scheme as part of the slipway reusers group comes forward, the contribution can be spent towards that scheme, providing that it provides improvements towards an existing slipway in East Cowes. So officers have sought that flexibility. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Supplementary, Councillor Fuller.
It's not really a supplementary. My concern is that if you are losing something that has public access for the local community, that should be reinstated. And the concerns that I've got is that the condition does not go far enough to reinstate something that is a public asset that is being lost. And I'm also concerned that that is something that hasn't been tied up yet.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. I'll read into that a question as well that I wanted to ask in relation to the cost of that and the reasonableness. I'm also interested in how that's been estimated and what potentially, as a committee, would be considered reasonable if we wanted to make a more stringent condition potentially.
Thank you, Chairman. Those costings have been established based on a preliminary report that demonstrates enhancements to the existing Dover Road slipway, not Dover Road, apologies, the existing Albany Road slipway, which would make it more accessible at different points of tide and better. It's currently, I don't know whether councillors know the Albany Road slipway, but it's currently almost brick slips down to, and it's very sharp, it's very steep. So it would enhance that existing slipway, making it more usable and at greater forms of tide. This is a balance that councillors have to take in relation to the application, what it is proposing and whether this is something that you think outweighs the benefits associated with the scheme ultimately. However, officers would draw attention back to what is being lost. And yes, it is a publicly accessible slipway. The Cowes Harbour Commission highlight that it is, they say, used with caution during ebb tides and when ferries are manoeuvring. Launching on spring ebb tides is not recommended. That's Cowes Harbour Commission's comments in terms of that slipway on their website. In terms of the, as highlighted in section 7.195 of the report and read out earlier, the East Cowes Town Council and the Harbour Commission Authority Committee minutes outline that it is not providing safe access for recreation, it is not fit for purpose, it is unsafe, it is slippery and it is dangerous. Therefore, when we are considering and assessing what we are losing and what we have to mitigate the loss of, we have to consider what we are trying to achieve here. And so what officers have done is acknowledge that the existing slipway isn't particularly fit for purpose. The slipway Albany Road isn't particularly fit for purpose, so a contribution has been calculated based on enhancements to that existing slipway to make it better than it is currently, which officers consider in the balance of the application and the benefits associated with the scheme is acceptable.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Councillor Spink, thank you.
I was going to ask about the slipway, but Councillor Fuller's dealt with it in Maine. I was just going to ask a couple of questions about it following on from that, which are these. It is, I think, a public right of way, isn't it? So it's like the equivalent almost to closing if you like, walking a footpath, or if you like, horse riding a bridleway. It is a public right of way. I think I'm right in saying.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. I don't know, Ms Wilkinson, you're able to speak to that or invite our legal officer to?
I think probably in a way, I think in a roundabout way, I can't confirm yes or no whether it's a public right of way or not. What I can confirm is it is owned by the council, and there would need to be a separate consenting process for its extinguishment.
The only supplementary regarding the slipway, please, is this, that one of the reasons, I mean, a lot of slipways aren't accessible or expected to be used in, say, a strong spring tide, particularly on the ebb. So it's not unusual, I would suggest, in that way. But the other reason that I think the town council said in its report, recorded in your report, that it wasn't used widely is because it's kept in a unclean and slippery condition. Is that the council's responsibility to keep that clean?
Ms Wilkinson.
I will be honest, and I have not been able to locate the agreement between the council and Red Funnel in terms of the terms of use, and therefore I can't confirm whose responsibility it is to keep clean. However, that is one element of why it's unusable, is considered to be unsafe. It is not solely that it's slippery. There are other elements set out within that in terms of it's not solely the kind of nature of it being slippery in terms of why it is not safe to access. It is a current situation, and although I consider that, comments have been raised that it's limited access by Red Funnel because they restrict access to make it safe, that is an existing situation. If the application were to be refused and on the grounds of the slipway, the situation currently wouldn't change. Red Funnel would continue to restrict access to that at the points in which it is suitable. We're not looking at a situation where it is an entirely open access slipway. We must look at it in terms of the current situation, what the application is going to result in the loss of, and therefore what it needs to mitigate. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Supplementary, Councillor Spink, then Councillor Andre.
Chair.
Yes, actually, I may invite our legal officer if she'd like to speak to that point. I fear it would seem that this is, in terms of the legal obligations of the council, the difference between the reality of what does happen and potentially the legal niceties of it. But Ms Gibson.
It was only a very, very brief point as to whether the public slipway constitutes a public right of way, and not automatically. is the answer to that. If it is included on the definitive map, then it is public right of way. Obviously, not having that information immediately in front of me, I couldn't confirm that. But just to say, not automatically, is it?
Thank you, Ms Gibson.
Just ask a question arising out of that.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. If it is on the map and it is a public right of way, what are the consequences of planning committee making it as part of their decision that that slipway be closed? Because that's what the application requests.
I think I'd let my colleague step in there because she seems itching to give an answer to
Ms
that.
Wilkinson.
Thanks, Chairman. Solely because we can answer the question, it is not on the definitive rights of way map. It is not a definitive right of way. But if it was, the planning process can result in the redirection and rediversion of rights of way. But that's irrelevant at this point because it is not in the definitive maps as a public right of way.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. My question revolves around traffic flow. Not so much the entrance, but the exit. And I note that there is a new entryway, I think, for the White Shipyard, but I can't find any comments. Have the White Shipyard been consulted on that? And I also note that there is to be signage to avoid confusion, but the fact that the report states there's going to be signage to avoid confusion concerns me that there is the need for signage.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. Valid question. Ms Wilkinson, can you speak to those 2 points?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I may have to ask you to repeat the one about signage because my apologies, I was in the process of trying to answer your first one. I can normally do both, but I must admit in that instance I didn't. In terms of directly consulted, the planning application consultation process has obviously gone through the required procedures. It is my understanding, but we are trying to double check now, that the council own the Columbine building. We will clarify that. I may be wrong, but I thought we owned it. So in terms of the landowner, it is us. Therefore, the impact is kind of, we are aware of it through the application and the submission. So that's one point. In terms of the access, currently to access, I think I'm right in saying this, currently, and we discussed it on site, to access the frontage of the Columbine building, you currently drive through Redux Yard. There is no other way to get to it. So the access into that building is currently through the Red Funnel site already. What this is doing is, in essence, we stood there at Redux Yard. You have to wait for a barrier to lift. It's controlled by Red Funnel. This would actually remove the control Red Funnel has over the access to the Columbine building. So it could be argued it's actually enhancing and making it easier for them.
Can I just refer you to 7.115. That was where my question emanated from. Thank you.
Sorry, yes, thank you. If I just, that refers to clear signage would be provided to ensure that drivers do not use this to enter and exit the site. If I pull the slides back up, which might help explain this. In essence, it's one of those things in order to cover potential user error. In that, on the slide, you can see that you have the, I've kept on this one, which hopefully is a suitably helpful one, where we see the existing entrance, the proposed entrance into the site, and then further along Castle Street, these aren't directly linked to each other, you have the exit from the site, but alongside that, you have the entrance into the Columbine building. So what the signage is intended to do is so that if someone travels too far up Castle Street, in essence, they don't try and enter the Red Funnel terminal through the Columbine exit. So those signs could be as simple as no entry, no unauthorized entry, no vehicles. access only for Columbine building, in order to ensure that people who are approaching this site who haven't been there before and miss the entrance don't overshoot and then end up going up the Columbine exit. However, if an error did occur, the layout within the marshalling yard, and this would be controlled through the terminal operations plan, which has been conditioned, incorporates what I don't think it's called a reject lane, but it's something similar in that it is a lane that if somebody either doesn't get through the booths, they can, in essence, get through the site and be turned around, and not impact on the free flow of traffic.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson.
Can I have a
Supplementary.
Yeah,
Yes, of course.
supplementary. So just so I'm absolutely clear in my mind. So we're talking about traffic, incoming traffic to the marshalling yard. So let's just play through the scenario, however unlikely it might be. So if a car misses the entrance and doesn't enter into the marshalling yard at all and carries straight on, how would they not conflate with the traffic exiting?
Thank you, Councillor Andre. Ms Wilkinson, I appreciate it's something of a supposition, isn't it? But ultimately, what would be are there any concerns particularly around what might happen then?
I think in answer to your question, Chairman, thank you, Chairman, no, there aren't any concerns about that. I think probably because we can't plan and design for every eventuality that a driver may or may not do. I was sat queuing for the floating bridge the other day and saw someone driving directly down the ramp, almost into the water, until someone ran after them and told them to reverse. I don't therefore suggest that the council in some way need to alter the entrance into the floating bridge to make it clear you can't drive into the water. But just as a little anecdote, shall we say. In the current situation, there is the potential for a vehicle to miss, especially considering the current marshalling yard is split. So if you are currently driving down Ferry Road to access into Phoenix Yard, you could miss that. How someone could with all the signage, I don't know. So it's unlikely, but you could. And then you actually end up in the queue of traffic for the floating bridge, or you travel round Link Road, and then you end up going in a circle around East Cowes and then come back to where you are. So the kind of network sets it out, but the application does incorporate the need for signage, which would, in essence, ensure that that potential risk is minimised in the most practical degree possible. But we can't design for all drivers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Chair. We were shown a comparison of the last application and now this application. The question's quite simple: is why was the last application not followed through and not completed?
Thank you, Councillor Jeffries. Are you able to speak to that, Ms Wilkinson?
Yes and no, Chairman. Thank you. In essence, the short answer is I can't really tell you, in that there isn't a requirement in planning to require development to be completed. It solely requires it to be commenced. They did commence this element of the site because they demolished all the buildings that were previously on Redux Yard, which was part of the description and the substantive development of the full element of the application. So it has extant consent. They could complete it at any point. We did receive an application subsequently for an alteration to the proposed terminal building, and they wanted to alter that. That didn't follow through, and therefore that there were various changes sought at that point. So I could speculate and say it probably doesn't achieve what they wanted it to achieve, because as I talked about during the slides, it has the drop-off area within the marshalling yard. It doesn't separate pedestrian traffic from vehicle traffic. So I can speculate that they did determine that it could be done better and they didn't want to pursue the scheme in front of us. But that would be pure speculation. They're not required to complete it as part of the planning process. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Supplementary, Councillor? No. Any additional questions before we move on to the debate element of this application? Yes, Councillor Bryson.
Thank you, Chairman. It's only regarding the outline element of the scheme. Obviously, there's been a mention a couple of times that things have been implemented following the previous approval and not completed, and there's bits of it that do resemble a half-built, site. With regards to those two elements of the scheme, obviously at the moment they are just essentially parking areas, really, aren't they? How can we be sure that they're not going to be just left to, if they're not built out and there's not a full scheme comes forward? Do we have some kind? Because I can't really find it in the document to say how can we be sure that those areas of the site are going to be managed and looked after going forward. If the rest of it's built out and that's just left, it could just become dilapidated and become an eyesore. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Ms Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. Kind of the answer is probably not a lot, aside from the existing powers that we have as an enforcement authority through 215. So if the site did get into a significantly poor state of repair, we could issue a 215 notice for it to be tidied up. But they, ultimately they are two large brownfield sites within the town centre. And therefore officers are supporting the outline consent for their redevelopment. You could say in relation to any planning application, what if it doesn't happen? The question falls down to what would be the change in circumstance considering the existing situation. If this resulted in this kind of, we're seeking consent, I'm probably going slightly past your question, so my apologies, Councillor Price, but ultimately, the existing site, as we've talked about, is one large area of hard standing that would be used for a large area of hard standing, and then two slightly smaller areas of hard standing, which would be as brownfield sites, which would be redeveloped for proposal for half housing commercial, half a hotel. If they didn't build out the outline element, those two parcels of land would remain two areas of hard standing in the town centre. And then we would have to use any powers we had through 215 to make sure they were retained in a tidy manner. But you could say that in essence about any brownfield site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Supplementary, Councillor Price. Additional questions, Councillor Richardson.
Thank you. Could you just confirm for me that all the 106 allocation, that is all going towards traffic changes? I wasn't quite sure from the report what 106 elements and what that was being allocated towards and what sort of harm that was being created and what it was going towards.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson. Ms Wilkinson.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. In answer to your question, in terms of the legal agreement, there are 3 heads of terms covered by the legal agreement. 35% affordable housing, which covers the 30 proposed or up to 30 proposed residential units as part of the outline. An SPA mitigation contribution, which again covers the outline element of the scheme, and then a slipway contribution of £170,000. There are no other requirements within the Section 106 agreement for any other contributions. The proposed off-site highway works are covered by a condition, and they would be subject to a 278/38 agreement through highways. Those are also listed in the report. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you. So there isn't any 106. It's a 278. That's where I was getting confused as to why. In some developments, it's been through the 106. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson. Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to ask a question, but it just arises out of Councillor Richardson's question to some extent, and that's this: the areas for outline planning permission. Is that land, and perhaps I should know the answer to this, but I don't, is that land which is owned by Red Funnel or by the council?
Ms Wilkinson.
Red Funnel.
Okay. Supplementary?
No, I don't have to. Thank you.
Additional questions, Councillor Richardson, of course.
The Columbine building that's come out of that, the ownership would be really good to be clear on who's there. So White Shipyards rent that off the council, just to be clear to what we're dealing with here.
The council currently owns the Columbine building.
Okay, so the access to this building, should it change ownership, would be, so will there be continual access considering all the loading and unloading and the stacking that's going on of things, will that be, in the conditions that there is always access to that building?
There's no condition that says access must always be retained to that building. That would be part of the terminal operations plan that is conditioned. However, I'd remind councillors when we were on site that to currently access the apron and to the front of the Columbine building, which is what we're talking about in essence, you have to go through the Redux yard. That's barriered, that's controlled by Red Funnel. So they currently control, as a company, they currently control access to the Columbine building. The proposal will incorporate a separate access specifically for Columbine building that will be outside of any of the Red Funnel control entrance or exits or uses. So although you will have to cross the exit lane for the terminal building, for the marshalling yard to get onto the frontage, that is the only point at which it crosses the land, unlike currently where you have to travel through the entirety of the Redux yard. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Supplementary? No. I take the temperature of the room, and I think ultimately we're moving towards perhaps the debate area of this application. Councillor Mosdell.
Thank you. Now I have to bring together all my scribblings, don't I? I need to start with this I have a very large haulage company within my ward, and they did say to me, could you make sure this happens, please? Because we're fed up of sitting in traffic that becomes absolutely gridlocked. And I think this will seriously improve that. Also having to travel to East Cowes quite often, I'm quite grateful that it doesn't become gridlocked. And thank you so much for the time that Sarah Wilkinson spent on the site visit going through all of this with us. It was really so useful. And being new to planning, I have to say it was so beneficial to go on that, and I really do appreciate it because it answered an awful lot of my questions, and I do like to ask questions. Some of the things that came up to me, apart from this looks so much better from flow, and the traffic design and stuff like that is so much better, and I do think will be better for East Cowes actually. A lot of the feeling that came out of this was animosity to how Red Funnel used to perform, and I don't think that's anything to do with us on this planning committee, and I am thankful that they do have new ownership now, and I think we should give them a chance to move forward. This is really important to the economy of the island, that we get our ferry terminals right and we had the flow right. I was quite bothered that we seem very fixated on a slipway, that when you go on site you actually think there, how would that ever safely be used anyway? I think on the site visit it was really clear that it was really difficult to get to, and anybody who came on that visit would think, well, I wouldn't actually want to be using that anyway. And I think Red Funnel have been really careful in controlling that, because you could see that it could be hazardous, and I like to hear that there are options. I would be quite worried if we start to dictate where that 170,000 goes, because if there's options to make it better used with another site than Albany Road, I think that we shouldn't actually give any restrictions on that. I looked at the outline for the hotel planning, and I look at it and think, well, it is outlined, but actually there is a need for a hotel there. So I think the worry of it not happening will just be, it is a worry. I think that in the future, it definitely looks like it's going to. And I was really impressed when we went on site to find out that the booths, all 5 of them, are actually going to be automated. It's quite annoying sometimes when you get to the booth and you've got someone asking really difficult questions. Having 5 of them that can be used and be automated, I think would actually help with that flow as well. So from my point of view, I'm not quite sure why we're spending so long, talking about something that we've already been shown on appeal. When an application from Red Funnel was refused, they were granted it, and we all know that actually appeals are costly to everybody, especially to this council in officers' time and stuff like that. So for me, I just think that we should move forward quite quickly on this one. And I actually, once again, Sarah, thank you for your time. You answered most of my questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mosdell. Councillor Price, followed by Councillor Quirk. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm probably going to get into trouble on this one, I'm afraid. So I apologise in advance. But I mean, really, this is going to create a huge improvement. But really, what Islanders want is a good, reliable ferry service at a good price. That's what we want. a huge amount of money that's going to be spent on this terminal. It is great, but the public need and desperately need something else. But we're here to speak about this particular application, obviously. So I think a huge amount of effort has gone into the access and the traffic management around the site. Yeah, I was on the committee for the previous application. I can't remember actually whether I was one of the ones that voted against it, probably. You know, but we're here today with a application that does improve things. And the previous application was allowed at appeal anyway, so could be built out, as we know. There are a number of improvements which I think are actually really good. The access to Columbine will be an improvement. At the moment, it's a nightmare, I should imagine, for the operators there. So that is an improvement, and it should keep ferry traffic well away from accidentally trying to go in there. There'll be, you know, times when I'm sure that happens, but ultimately it will be better. We've spent an awful lot of time on this conversation about the slipway, and it is a slipway that is really not used. It's a real mess. You know, I know that slipway quite well. I've certainly I've never witnessed or know of anyone that's used it. I should imagine it'd be a disaster. Why would anyone want to launch anything from that slipway? And there doesn't seem to be any representations here tonight from anyone that would want to use that slipway either. I appreciate maybe the heritage of it, but I would hazard a guess that probably at one time, 100 years ago, it might have been used by Red Funnel, perhaps. I don't know. The way the money is being looked at to maybe improve a slipway somewhere else makes sense. I think that's the right way to deal with it. I think going back to the outline elements, I think probably the thing I do still have an issue with, and I wonder if there's something we could build into any resolution tonight, that we ask the applicant to seriously look at the outline elements and try and incorporate as much on-site parking as possible. East Cowes does have a parking issue, and if we're serious about this actually trying to be something that improves the town, you know, not putting more pressure on the local parking with the hotel and other retail uses and potentially residential accommodation, would just make it worse. I think, you know, just reinforcing that perhaps when it comes back for the reserved matters or however, or the full application, that there is some allowance for a real study and some good allowance for parking. That's all I'd ask.
Thank you, Councillor Price. From that, I read that ultimately you're making a point that perhaps you want to be underlined and minuted rather than a proposal in terms of conditioning. Is that correct? Yeah.
Sorry, Chairman. Through you, I guess the full application would probably come back to this committee anyway, and it will probably be a different committee then. You know, it would be good to be sure that we've asked the right questions now, and hopefully, you know, put in mind of the applicant in the future that parking is something probably the next committee would be focusing on those two elements of the site.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Price. I think, yeah, certainly that's a sentiment we can underline and I think reflect the fact that it is an issue depending on where this application goes. Councillor Quirk.
Over the last 4 years, the council has completely removed its input into regeneration, and it's now entirely dependent on other outside bodies doing major regeneration schemes. And this is a windfall that is an absolutely brilliant scheme. It will regenerate the centre of East Cowes. It will improve the traffic flows. It will make it easier to get onto the island. It will make it a nicer place when you actually start and leave the island. So the first impression and the last impression is much like it's so much better now in Ryde with the new gateway there. I think it's a no-brainer. If we turned it down, and I hear people sort of trying to find little technical points that you could subject to it on, it will be turned over by the inspectorate. I went to a conference with the where there's a presentation from the general manager of the inspectorate, who said the basic message he was giving is we're going to approve everything. But unless there are really good grounds, so there's no real intrinsic reason to turn this down, and grasping at straws of how you enter the building, whether the slipway's there, little traffic issues. This is a good scheme, and I think we should prove it. I do think we should put a condition in that it comes back, that the reserved matters do come back to committee. That's all I would add.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Councillor Fuller.
I was just going to propose that we support the application in line with officer's recommendation. I think that all of the issues that have been raised, I had concerns about the slipway. As long as we can see an improvement there, a gain for the community, yes, I can support it. And I think that it certainly makes access into East Cowes and to the island a lot easier. And I think that a lot of the issues that were previously raised has been overcome. And I certainly am very, very happy about the improved access to the Columbine building, which was also another issue locally. So I'm more than happy to propose that we, as the application, as per officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Quirk, you're seconding that? Yes, certainly. If with indulgence of colleagues, I'll pause it just so that we can hear from a couple of other colleagues. So we have Councillor Critchinson, sponsored by Councillor Spink, followed by Councillor Andre. Councillor Critchinson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come back to the traffic issues up Old Road. I think we do need to have looked into that, and I think got major concerns about that, the extra traffic going that way, and that there is no mitigation on that road, no traffic calming, no crossing points. There's a school up there, there's not a lot of pathways, footpaths, and we are going to encourage cars are going to go that way. It's going to seem, the ones turning on the left-hand lane, it will seem more ideal to turn left. I can see that. And I think if we haven't at least looked into it, I feel that if there was this transport strategy and we haven't, that was paid for by public money as well, and whether it was through the transport fund or through regeneration, and now we don't have a regeneration team, it would be irresponsible not to have taken some of those elements of that into consideration. And I think we do need to have put some safety, traffic calming, safety measurements into Old Road, into this plan. I think that's, if we don't do that, I think it is irresponsible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Critchinson. Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that comments have been made that this is a needed terminal, and that it will be a good thing for the island and a good thing for East Cowes. But one has to perhaps bear in mind that both the ward member for East Cowes and also the East Cowes Town Council don't agree. And I listened to their addresses. They were based on, in my view, material planning considerations. And I think we have to start listening to what, and giving considerable weight to what local communities want. You know, I don't want to personalize it, but the ward member for East Cowes takes the welfare of East Cowes very seriously, and I think we would all agree with that, as does the town council. I do agree with Councillor Critchinson that I think the traffic arrangements do leave some large question marks. And I just think that with such a major terminal, we could do better. I think it's likely to be overdeveloped with 30 houses, an 80-bedroom hotel in the highest floodplain, causes me concern. I also think that it's not going to be very attractive. I mean, there are many eyesores that one sees and asks themselves, goodness me, how did they ever get permission to do that? And when I looked at the photographs on with Miss Wilkinson's presentation, I was rather concerned. I mean, the terminal building is very high. It didn't look to me very attractive from that shot from across the water. It is the gateway to one of the gateways to the island. Cowes is one of the prominent towns, West Cowes, one of the prominent towns on the island with lots of visitors. It's not going to add, I don't think, that high building with also the walkway at a very high height. It's not going to add to the visual improvement of the area, in my view. And I think that with more careful thought and more consideration, this application could achieve a much more attractive and effective ferry terminal. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. Councillor Andre, followed by Councillor Mosdell. And given the time, I'll push for a certain degree of brevity. Not that I wish to rush colleagues, but I appreciate we've been going for 2 hours. So, Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think some really good points have been made here today, and I've listened to all of them. And of course, it's all about balance and how much weight we give to the aspects of the application. And on balance, there are several elements that really stand out for me. I think in terms of regeneration for East Cowes, I think a lot of thought and a lot of work has gone into the revision of this application. And I think from a user point of view, yes, this is the gateway, one of the main gateways to our island. And I think what is actually proposed will be a much better gateway. I do like the idea as well that I know East Cowes, yes, we all know that traffic is a huge issue in East Cowes, but I think having a larger marshalling yard that will enable traffic to actually come off. I've always thought the current arrangement where you actually have to go into a yard, then you have to cross over, and it's not good. The increase in number of booths and the automation, which will make it easier. For me as well, the actual drop-off area, I think that's a real positive that it separates out the pedestrian area. So I am minded to support this application because I think on balance for me, it ticks an awful lot of boxes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. Councillor Mosdell.
Thank you. I go back to my original point of thanking the officers for taking so much time to make such a thorough report and for the time that they spent on site. A lot of those questions, these questions that have come up today, were answered on site. And I'm sorry, even if you painted the building pink, it's a ferry terminal, and you're not going to grasp the whole lot and make it the most attractive thing in the world. On site, it was actually really clear that this would be a very crisp, cleaning up that area and actually improving what is already there. And if people attended the site visit, that would have come across incredibly strongly. I think whatever you do about road signage, and I don't think it's a long time since I saw a plan that's covered in so many different signage and stuff like that, and mitigation, and actually the applicant should be given some credit for the amount they've done. And we talk about a report that was done by, we've got Island Roads here, you know, I'm sorry, but Island Roads have gone through and are happy with this and are not requesting anything else. They are those experts that we actually contract to give that information to us. And I think we should abide by it. And I think whatever signage you do, if someone's going to drive like a numpty, they're going to drive like a numpty, you know, sorry, but that's what they're going to do. I've come off that ferry sometimes and seen people still trying to come down to what is a really tiny drop-off point. And then you try and see them wander up the road to try and get themselves, you know, their local takeaway when they weren't even going into red funnel. That is suitably frustrating. I think this was really good, but my request would be if officers have spent the time to do a thorough report and a thorough visit on site, then everybody should attend and listen to what officers got to say, because I think it would have saved an awful lot of time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mosdell. I think we will now go to the vote. Oh, Councillor, sorry, Nye, I beg your pardon, Councillor Nye.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to move forward on this. I felt quite sorry for Sarah actually being put on the spot there. Well done to you. I agree with everything actually that Councillor Mosdell has said. At the end of the day, highways have no objection. They're the experts. I would hesitate to disagree with them, quite frankly. This particular stage in what's going on, anybody that's prepared to make an investment of this magnitude, quite frankly, needs to be welcomed with open arms. So I think we should move forward on this. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Nye. So we do have an extant proposal made by Councillor Fuller, seconded by Councillor Quirk to approve this application. All those in favour of approval?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And against?
1, 2.
Abstentions?
1.
Thank you. That application is approved. Thank you very much. Thank you to our public speakers. We will now have a short 10-minute break, so we will reconvene at 6:20. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much for bearing with. I think that was a very comprehensive and detailed debate. So thank you very much. We move then to reference 25/01278/OUT, which is Social Services Headquarters, Fairley House, Fairley Road. I believe that Mr. Chick is presenting on this, so I'll invite Mr. Chick to commence whenever he's ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so the application site is an existing but vacant council office building located on the western side of Fairley Road. I'll just show with this red cursor. I'll just get that. Don't need that there. So the cursor is hovering above the existing building. It was historically a police station many years ago. More recently, it's been used by social services. It's now vacant. The council's record office is located just to the north of the site, and you can see the intervening areas are used for parking. The site access is from Hillside Road. That road is closed at the point of the cursor here, so it's not a through road any longer, but it can be accessed via Fairley Road. Having some slight cursor problems for some reason. There we go. Then some photographs of the application site then. I think most of us probably recognise that building, having sat in the queues opposite to it every now and again. So it's quite a historic building, red brick under a slate roof. Elements of it are 3-storey, which you can see in this photograph, which is taken from the rear of the site in the parking area I showed you just now. And then alongside the building are residential properties. These properties on the right-hand side of the side are listed buildings. The properties on the other side are not, but you can see the side elevation windows in the listed building opposite to the existing council offices, and a small side elevation window here. And then moving on, just to show some close-up photographs of the relationship between the council offices and those buildings. You can see a slight side elevation window to the rear of this property, number 15 Fairley Road, and then just below it where arrow B is taken from, so photograph B, again you can see the relationship to the rear. So the council building there is quite a large building as it exists, and then the photographs shown as B and D are showing the side elevation of the listed building. Moving swiftly on, I just wanted to show the designations that relate to the site. It's not in the flood zone. That's denoted by the blue colour here, which shows where the flood zone 2 and 3 are. The SPA extends down to the Medina there, but the site is not within that. And then the 2 dots, grey dots surrounded by red circles, are the listed buildings next to the site being the block at the point of the cursor here. And then the green areas are open space. But the site is not within any of those designations. So the proposal is purely outline. So none of the detailed considerations are up for grabs through this application. It is purely trying to establish the principle of putting 10 2-bed apartments on this site. All of them would be affordable housing at discount market, so 80% of market value. The proposal is to fully demolish the existing building and replace it with a 3-storey building. And you can see the footprint here. I thought the slide on the right-hand side is quite useful because that shows the footprint of the existing building and where the immediate front elevation extends onto Fairley Road. So what is proposed is to pretty much align with the setback of that existing building. Then just showing some elevations, just a health warning. This is purely indicative to show that a building of this scale could fit on the site. Those designs clearly would not be supported by the planning authority, but they are just an indication of a scale of a building that could be fitted on the site. So 2-storey with accommodation in the roof space to accommodate 10 apartment blocks. And this is just showing it in a street scene depiction, just showing a transition between the 3-storey buildings off to the north and the 2-storey dwellings to the south, with the building providing a transition between those levels in the street scene. So the application is proposed for outline permission. with all the other matters reserved should the application be approved. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chick. We turn then to our public speaking elements. So Councillor Price is the ward member. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I haven't prepared anything to say particularly about this this site. It's clearly a site that is probably ripe for development in some ways. The building, it's a shame to lose that building. It's older than it looks. It was once our police station in Newport, and does, you know, come with some, I feel, some architectural merits. But I realised that trying to repurpose that building, I've been in it many times over the years, repurpose that building into modern accommodation would be very, very difficult. I wasn't in there when it was a police station, by the way, so not that old for a start. But obviously it's going to sadly lead to demolition of the existing building. Could I maybe ask that that building isn't demolished until it's sold, perhaps? Because otherwise we may end up with a demolition site right on the gateway to Newport, let's say. I don't know if that's something the committee can do, but maybe the council could consider that when they're marketing the site. But you know, to put affordable units and accommodation there makes sense. There's a brilliant connection into Newport there. You can walk straight under the railway tunnel, or you can walk straight into town, so easy, and pick up on the transport links. There's a bus stop almost outside of this property, just a few feet away. So there's great connections. It's an ideal site for this purpose. My only request would be, and it's probably not really appropriate now at the outline stage, but maybe it's something the committee could consider putting in, is that I think the materials right next to the listed building should be considered. I think staying away from rendering, trying to maybe mimic some of the types of bricks that are used in the listed building next door or some of the other nearby buildings. Fairley Road has a mixture of buildings, I've realised that. But I'm very protective of Fairley Road, and you know, I think making sure the right thing is built there that looks right. Architecture is free really at the beginning, isn't it? Making sure that the right building is designed and built there. It doesn't have to break the bank to build the right building there. It just needs to look right. The purpose that it's outlined for makes absolute sense, and on that basis I would support this application as the local member. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Chairman, I will remove myself from the committee now for the debate, as that is now one of our procedures.
Thank you very much, Councillor Price. That's appreciated in accordance with the Code of Conduct. Very much helpful in the sense of we appreciate that you wouldn't influence us, but we need to be open and transparent. We move then to the, as it were, the question element of this debate, to the extent that we can keep it separate. I appreciate that it may well bleed into it. It's just useful for those watching at home. Any questions? Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. This may not be a question that can particularly be answered, but I note that at least by planning officers, but I note that the recommendation is for demolition, outline is for demolition, and then for the affordable housing. Do we know if that's actually viable? Because we know that the costs of demolition can be quite considerable, because I wouldn't want to approve an application that didn't actually stack up financially.
Thank you very much, Councillor Andre. Perhaps if you may, I'll add on to that. Could we have a little bit more information? I believe there's a grant as well in relation to this, and the extent to which demolition would be contingent upon that grant. Would it happen, and what's the viability? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, so the council applied for a raft of grants for what's called the, doesn't like me. Yeah, so basically the council applied for brownfield release funding, and that applied to several sites across the island, including the former education HQ at Sandy Lane, Western Academy, and this site was one of them as well. So basically, the whole purpose of that grant is to remove the cost of demolition for a would-be developer in future. The requirement of that grant is that the site delivers affordable housing. So as part of that grant and being spent by the council, the site can only be sold for affordable housing. That grant has to be used by a certain time as well, so it's time limited. So yes, the building would be demolished prior to it being sold, I understand. But that is part of the grant conditions. But also noting that the site isn't in the conservation area. So in a conservation area, we would have a sort of contract system where we put into the agreement for demolition that there is a quick commencement date for the site. But this site isn't in the conservation area and probably wouldn't look harmful if the site was flattened and cleared.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chick.
Could I have a
Supplementary, of
supplementary
course.
on that? Just so I'm clear in my mind. So because of the Brownfield Release Fund, who is responsible for actually arranging the demolition? I understand the grant element of it, but is the council responsible for that? Or are we able to effectively port the grant to the developer for the demolition?
Thank you, Councillor Andre. Mr. Chick.
Yep, so effectively the requirement of the grant is the developer receives a clean site. So the council would demolish. That's what's happened at Sandy Lane at Whitecroft. So the site is complete, devoid of any building there. Exactly the same situation would apply to this site.
Thank you.
Sorry, just assuming that this is approved then we would be in a position to move quickly. So potentially what we are saying is the site would be a clean site. So at what point would it be marketed? Would it be marketed post demolition or pre-demolition?
Thank you, Councillor Andre. Mr. Chick.
Okay, yeah, it probably doesn't matter when it's marketed. So for example, Western Academy has been marketed and there's a preferred developer in place who's got a contract in place to design up a scheme. But in terms of this site, as I understand it, the council has even procured the contract for it to be demolished. So they have a contractor to demolish it. As soon as permission is granted, that building can be demolished.
Just concerned about the state of the site being left post demolition prior to any development going up. But I understand that's something we don't really have control over.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. Councillor Swink.
Thank you, Chair. I support this application in principle because I'm in favour of affordable housing, and to have a development that I appreciate. I do have a question, but I just thought I'd make my position clear. But and to have a development that is entirely affordable housing is, of course, a good thing. My concern and my question really relates to whether or not it should all be affordable housing in the sense of affordable housing for sale, or whether or not the a proportion of it should be social housing for rent. And I ask that from a, as it were, the point of view of society, as it were, and taking people off the temporary housing register. But I also ask it in relation to this council's land disposal policy, which says that council-owned property, which is considered suitable for residential use, should be assessed for social housing, not necessarily exclusively social housing, but in part at least. Now, there's no assessment. And at what stage will the assessment take place? And how does that affect the position if we've granted planning consent? Because I would be against it if it doesn't have a significant component of social housing for rent.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. And I think that was certainly also one of the points of one of the public representations, the wider policy surrounding social rent. So, Mr. Chick, would you be able to speak to that at all?
Yes, so ultimately the proposal in front of us and in the application forms is that this is discount market sale housing. So that's what the council has applied for, and that's what we have to make the decision based on.
Thank you. Supplementary, Councillor Spink.
I do have a supplementary. I shall vote against it in that case. And I ask this question, if it's only going to be, I shall vote against it if it's going to be simply affordable housing to purchase with no social rent element. And secondly, perhaps this is a question for elsewhere, but why is the council proposing something which is contrary to its own land disposal policy?
Thank you, Councillor Spink. Perhaps that's something that we can ventilate further in the debate, save that my question might be, to what extent would we be on unsafe ground were we to mandate that? Is that something you could speak to, Mr. Bolter?
Certainly, Chair. Thank you. Just to clarify, what we're looking at is an application that's in front of us, and we obviously, as we'll know from our training, will make our decision in accordance with the development plan, unless material relevant planning considerations indicate otherwise. The council's asset disposal strategy is not part of the suite of planning documents that we would consider, nor have we considered when arriving at the recommendation in front of you all this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bolter. Councillor Quirk.
I actually support affordable housing, whether it's affordable to buy or whether it's affordable to rent, because there are people who are just above the threshold for being on a housing list who are just told to go away because they've got a job. And you know, if you haven't got a job, then you go on the housing list. But if you have got a job, forget it. And so I am sympathetic, very sympathetic. But I actually agree with Peter. This is policy not consistent with our policies, and I actually think I would have to vote with Peter against it. But I would suggest that we defer it and send it back for them to actually come back and either come back policy compliant or accept the fact it might be turned down.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Mr. Chick, are you able to speak to some of the issues surrounding this?
Yes, this application has to come to this committee, because if it doesn't come to this committee and the decision is not made, the grant will be lost, and the Brownfield Release Grant Fund has closed. So these proposals would be lost. The proposal in front of you is policy compliant. It may not be policy compliant with a different council policy, which is not planning policy guidance. It's refused on those grounds. If this was a private developer and not the council, the developer would be appealing a decision that was unreasonable. The definition of affordable housing includes discount market sale. Discount market sale houses are a form of affordable housing. They're a form of affordable housing that is needed. In this location, apartments sell for around, I did some homework on this, they sell for around 140 up to about £170,000. So these properties would be selling around the £100,000 mark. They'd be extremely affordable for local people. And it is one of the forms of affordable housing which is referred to in the island planning strategy, the island plan as being needed. It's also referred to as one of the definitions in the NPPF, so it is fully policy compliant.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. We have Councillor Fuller, followed by Councillor Mosdale. Councillor Fuller.
Yeah, I was going to say very similar to what Russell was saying. We're here as a planning committee to look at a sustainable development, low cost housing in the middle of Newport. Turning it down would be absolutely ridiculous. Deferring it would be absolutely ridiculous. That is the plan that we have before us. We are providing low cost housing in an area that is sustainable. There just would not be, you know, we would be just laughed at by a planning inspector if we turned it down. Now, if there's issues that we have with the council's disposal of assets policy, this isn't the rules of the planning committee. We're not here to look at that policy. We are here to determine a planning application, and it would be totally foolhardy to not support this application as it stands. We wouldn't be able to do it for a private developer. Yes, the council should be doing the right thing, but at the end of the day, we are here as a planning committee, and for that reason, I will be proposing that we support the application. I don't think we have any choice.
Thank you very much. So that was a formal proposal, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Critchinson seconded. With your indulgence, I'll pause it just so that we can hear from other councillors who've indicated they wish to speak. First of all, being Councillor Mosdell. Councillor Mosdell.
Thank you. I do think we got ourselves taken off on a tangent and distracted, but I also think this isn't the place to have the discussion. But now we've gone down this route, I'm going to put my full penneth worth in. So we look at the housing register and it keeps getting quoted and houses for rent. But actually what we forget is aspiration, and what we forget is the young people who are still staying within their own families' homes, saving up deposits to be able to buy properties like this. Those people aren't on the housing register. You know, they're not looking for social rent. What they're looking is to actually get on the first step of the housing ladder, which this is what they would do, and then they would aspire to buy something else, like most of us in this room actually did a while ago. We weren't fixated on who's on the housing register, who's looking for rent, and I think we would look so foolhardy if we go down this rabbit hole and we actually refuse this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mosdell. Any further comments or questions from colleagues? Councillor Spink.
Could I just ask when the brownfield grant expires?
Thank you. Do we have that date?
I've got
Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. From memory and based on my understanding, there is a deadline, certain things needing to happen this side of Christmas.
Thank you. Supplementary, Councillor Spink.
No, I don't have a supplementary. Once the questions are closed.
Yes, thank you. I should have made clear, because we had more of a blended approach. I should probably not keep belabouring this point of having a demarcation, because it's maybe causing more difficulty for colleagues. I'm just keen, obviously, from those viewing publicly, that sometimes it's a bit easier. But yes, thank you. Councillor Spink, you wish to?
I do. No. Yeah, I don't want to take the committee's time up to any large extent, but I am concerned about this. Council-owned land gives us the best opportunity of taking people off the housing register. We get affordable housing through private development, not through council-owned land. It does seem to me, I don't know why then people voted, if I may say so, to have a policy that council-owned land should be assessed for social housing. But there it is. We have a policy now which we are choosing to ignore. I think it's a disservice to those people who are in temporary accommodation, have been there for several years, won't be able to benefit from this, won't come out of temporary accommodation, and are stuck. And I had thought that this council was going to use council land to help those in temporary accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. Additional comments from colleagues, in which Councillor Andre.
Just one final comment in response to that, and it picks up on what Councillor Mosdell was saying. This is all part of a chain. This is all part of providing people with a safe space to live. And I don't think we can look at social housing, affordable housing, private housing, all in isolation. I think it's really important that we do look at it as a sequence. So I'm very much in support of this, because I think it will ultimately free up and it will help all island residents that currently don't have a safe place to live. Thank you.
Very much, Councillor Andre. We do then have a motion that's been proposed and seconded, proposed by Councillor Fuller, seconded by Councillor Critchinson. So I will press to the vote. So those in favour of approving this application.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
And against?
1.
Thank you. No abstentions. Councillor Price is recused himself. Thank you very much. So that concludes that application. West Acre, and apologies to colleagues and officers, but I think on balance, it is best for us to debate that when we can have all sides properly represented, as it were. Not to say that it is an adversarial process, because it is not. It is about a democratic process of understanding where things went wrong, where things went well, what we can do better in the future. We turn then to members' questions. Are there any questions? Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question that simply arises out of the last decision, so I haven't given notice. I'm not expecting necessarily an answer tonight, but I would like to know why this application wasn't first, before coming before Planning Committee, why it wasn't assessed for social housing in accordance with the land disposal policy, because it does seem to me that that policy has been circumvented. And we've yet again had a situation where a gun's been put to our head, not by the planning staff, but in full council, it's often the government provisions that, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So I'd just like to know, please, why this land was not assessed by the property department for social housing in accordance with this council's policy. Thank you. I don't need an answer to necessarily.
Thank you, Councillor. I will invite Mr. Bowles to speak as a provisional statement, if he feels happy so to do, but perhaps appreciate that he may wish to give a more fulsome response in the course of time. Mr. Bowles.
Thank you, Chair. Although I think, as Councillor Spink, you made the point that that's not a question necessarily for the LPA to answer. Obviously, what we've dealt with is the application in front of us. From a planning perspective, there is no requirement for the council's asset disposal strategy to have been applied before an application was submitted or put in front of you under the council's code of constitution, in terms of it's an Isle of Wight council owned piece of land. I would wonder out loud whether this is a sequencing thing and a timing thing. So ultimately, I would anticipate that as and when the council potentially look to sell this piece of land, excuse me, they would go through that exercise as they are required to do. But I think I would imagine that there will be a number of other people, colleagues in other service areas, who will be better placed to answer the wider question than us tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bowles. I will perhaps canvass further discussion to the extent that I can amongst officers, if that's helpful, Councillor Spink. I think it's useful to perhaps just feed into the general policy surrounding planning, although, as Mr. Bolter has indicated, it's something that the planning authority would not consider.
Would it be possible to have a written response? And I appreciate that Mr. Bolter has not had a chance to consider it. The position, if I may be permitted to say, that concerns me is that the will of full council is being effectively, maybe accidentally, I don't know, but circumvented, in that the land is not being assessed. Now, Mr. Bolter says it can be assessed at the point that it's being sold, but we've only granted permission now, that's why I asked the question, for affordable housing for sale. We've not granted a consent for affordable housing or social housing for rent. And normally, even when it's a private development, of the 35% affordable, a percentage, usually with Jeff Brodie's pressing, as it were, usually 80% of that is for rent. And so, although this is a good development, we've actually reduced the number of rents that even social rents that even private developers would do. And we've done that as a council. I'd just like also, if I may, the point is said that it would be appealed. Well, the council's making the application. If this planning committee had refused it, we would not surely have appealed ourselves, would we?
Mr. Bolter.
that wouldn't be a decision that I would make. And ultimately, I would still steer us back to the application that was in front of us and relevant and material planning considerations.
This is the perennial question of competing regimes and policies which we are bound by, which can be very frustrating. I will certainly canvass those views to the extent that I'm able to and get a reply in writing to you. Any further questions from colleagues? In which case, all it remains me to say is thank you very much. These were two quite substantive. Certainly the first application, I know that officers and colleagues spent a lot of time reading and understanding and debating. So thank you very much. Thank you.